Have you ever thought about why some old gardeners are so successful? Have you ever considered that maybe it's more than what they do in the garden and more about how they approach life? Join me today as I share with you some lessons from a 95-year-old gardener. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and recently I had the wonderful opportunity to sit down and honor the life of a 95-year-old gardener friend. I, along with some other older gardening friends, had a lunch with him last week, and it was just a fantastic experience to spend time with him again. I've been gardening for about 30 years and hopefully anticipate another 30 years. That'll put me short of the amount of time that he's been gardening. I wasn't lucky enough to learn about gardening early in life, but Howard Matz did. And for 80 years, he's been tracking what he's done in the garden and learned a lot about gardening and life in general. And believe it or not, at 95 years old, he actually published some of those lessons. This is Memory Gems from A to Z by Howard Matz. This is just volume 1. This is actually a 3-volume series because Howard has learned so much in life that it took 3 books to put it all down. Now, imagine this. You see something that interests you, just a little snippet of information. Maybe it's a saying in a book or something you saw on TV. Most of us see it, maybe smile, maybe think about it, and then it's lost forever. Well, Howard wrote down all of those little snippets throughout his entire life. When he was 15 years old, as part of an assignment from a teacher, he started writing down some of these lessons of life, how to live it, what to think about, and just interesting items that piqued his interest. And he kept it going for 80 years, enough to write it all down and have it published. Now, let me share with you one of the things from the very beginning of this book, because it's all alphabetical by the topics that he discusses. More happens in the garden than what is planted there. And I think that says a lot, not just about we as gardeners, but especially about Howard. The garden is a place that many of us go to for some solace. Maybe it's an escape from our life. Maybe it's an opportunity to learn something. Maybe it's a place where we can grow something to feed our family. We all have different reasons for going to the garden. But whatever we find there is more than what the garden and that individual plant has to offer. For me, the garden is a place to develop a philosophy of life. It really gives me the opportunity to explore my own mind. When you're putting a seed or a plant in the ground, sure, you're focused on that specific task at hand, but most gardeners let their minds wander and start thinking about the future of that plant and the future of the garden, which I think works well for us to start thinking about developing the future for ourselves. What will our life be? What will your life be when you're 95 years old? I imagine that I'll still be gardening. Don't know for sure, but that's a great goal to set and work toward. I hope to have a point where I can sit down with some younger gardening friends when I reach that point, like I did with Howard. Howard was a great gardening mentor to me. He's one of the kindest, most giving, most humble men that I've ever met. And he's extremely knowledgeable when it comes to gardening. His memory is far better than mine. He reminded me of some things that happened years ago that I'd long forgotten, which makes it especially important that I got his series of 3 books so that I could see a little more about the insight that Howard has had through life, because he's had a great impact on my gardening career, and maybe I can share some of that with you and with other gardeners over the course of the years. I went through the Master Gardener course about 20 years ago, and Howard Matz was one of the instructors for the program. And he'd been a Master Gardener for about 20 years by that point. Wow, I just think that's incredible. He was willing to share all of his time and experience with those of us that were trying to learn more. And so following his lead, that's why I make these videos, to help you learn more, not just about gardening and plants, but about life in general, because the garden has so many lessons to teach. In the same section that I began with, there's a couple other things that Howard pointed out. One is that plants have things to say. Do you listen to what your plants are saying? And it's not just about that plant and what's affecting it on that day, but just in general, just listening to your plants, seeing how they grow, seeing what affects those plants can give you some ideas about what's affecting you in your life. And here's another one. Weed out the negatives in your life. Well, yeah, we're weeding around our plants because we want our plants to grow bigger and stronger. Well, the same holds true for life in general. If you weed out the negatives in your life, then you'll grow stronger and you'll be happier for it. This is not a series of how-to garden, and this is not a series of self-help books. Instead, these are just observations that a good man made over the course of 80 years. It's more than just gardening. Howard is a religious man, and so there are many religious observations in this book as well. But much of it is just his day-to-day living. He saw something and put it in a list that we now can observe. Howard is a lifelong educator. After retiring as a school teacher, he became a master gardener and then became an educator for future master gardeners. That's how our paths crossed. And Howard would be among the first to tell you that he's just giving you some ideas. He's just helping to guide you on your path. He's not giving you advice that you have to follow. And as I look at this book, he has some of those kind of observations about life and advice that might be helpful. For instance, advice is seldom welcome. Those who need it most like it least. Samuel Johnson said that. Advice is something we give by the bushel, but take by the grain. Advice is what older men offer to younger men when they can no longer set them a bad example. That's from Irvin Cobb. And advice is what we ask for when we already know the answer, but wish we didn't. That comes from Erica Jong. He didn't make up all of this stuff. Instead, he took some wise sayings from a lot of other wiser and maybe more experienced people, and now we can go through this. This doesn't read like a novel. It's just a list of sayings. And it may take me the next 30 years to go through because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of different comments in this book that are worth reading. I've always admired and respected Howard and liked him from the very first moment that we met. But now I can see even clearer just what a wise man Howard Matz is. How over the course of his life, he not only had a huge impact on so many others, but when he's gone, he'll continue to have that same impact. Not with what he has said, but what he has compiled. The sayings in this series of books, the wisdom in these books that future generations may have the opportunity to discover again. I've said many times before in previous videos and many of my live streams that a gardening journal is an important thing that as a serious gardener you should maintain. It's a place you can write down observations about the weather, about your garden, about insects, about whatever you want it to be. And then you can look back on those observations the next year or in future years and hopefully have a better garden as a result of it. Well, now I'm going to suggest that you do something extra for your gardening journal, and maybe it's to follow the guideline that Howard Matz has set for us. And that's to start writing down observations, not just about the garden and your plants and the insects, but about life in general. If you come across a saying, if you see somebody say something in a movie or on a TV show, well, annotate it, make note of it. And the Gardening Journal may be the perfect location for you to do that. Because those of us that are journaling will refer back to it at some time, even though it may be well in the distant future. And I've done that way too many times. Journals from years ago, I'll review occasionally and find something that I'd forgotten all about. And so it recharged an old memory. Well, maybe some sayings like those from Howard Matz would be the kind of thing that can recharge us in the years ahead. So for the next 30 years or more, I'll be looking at some of what Howard has laid out for me, and I'll also have the opportunity to review some of the things that I laid out for myself. And in this first volume, towards the back, I'll go ahead and read this. Good old days start with good new days like today. Every new day will at some point be an old day. And so I ask you, how will you remember today? And how will you remember tomorrow? And if you don't, make an effort over the course of 80 years to remember what every new day and every new experience posed to you, you might be forgetting an awful lot of good things in your life. I encourage that you start keeping track of the good days in your life and annotate why it was a good day, so that in the years ahead, when you look back on these good old days, you know why they were so good. You can recharge the memories of your own and maybe highlight the impact you had on the lives around you, like Howard Matz did and the lives around him. If you've benefited from this video and maybe have some ideas that you want to spread to help make the world better, I encourage that you share this video with others that might benefit as well. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.